It's time now for award-winning 21st Century Radio. Here's your host, Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
Everybody's got somebody to lean on. Put your body next to mine and dream on. I feel the pain and the but I can't help myself like it. Oh, sweet little thing.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus this time around, folks, and maybe next time I'll choose a different name. And, of course, our executive producer and research assistant for the past 15 years, actually, it's closer to 15, is Dr. Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Tom Morosky. There goes the greatest group in the planet. Unfortunately, two of them have decided to leave their bodies. They're out now, and of course, they're probably having a good time twisting the night away, or twisting the day away, or twisting someday away. Well, friends, in the mid-1970s, my closest friend, who was later to be my best man and Joe and our wedding, was Christopher Bird. Remember Christopher Bird? He authored and co-authored The Secret Life of Plants and Secrets of the Soil and a lot more. Chris Bird is the one who introduced me to the UFO research of Edward Billy Meier and his works detailing UFO contact from the Pleiades. Now, there was considerable skepticism about Billy Meier's extraordinary photos, but both Chris and I felt they were credible. Over a decade later, when 21st Century Radio was born, that was about January 1988, I was determined to investigate Meier's claims in greater depth, and we were fortunate to be joined repeatedly with Colonel Wendell Stevens and later Dr. Dave Treppus, who were convinced that Meier's work was not only credible, but of great importance. I also turned to my old friend, Dr. Marcel Vogel, who actually studied some of the metallic fragments that Meier claimed were given to him by the extraterrestrials, and Dr. Vogel was indeed impressed by what he discovered. As we moved into the mid-90s, we broadcasted a debate between Cal Korff and James Dilettoso. Now, I was very disappointed by the results of that debate because James Dilettoso, whose work I had grown to respect, didn't bother to read Cal Korff's book. Whoa! I mean, how are you going to debate a book that you haven't read? That sounds like what the modern media does today, doesn't it, friends? Well, that was unfortunate, Brother James. And, in recent years, I was determined to review the important work of Billy Arthur Meier, or actually it's, we can call him Billy Meier, but I don't think he particularly likes that name, but he stuck with it, I guess, by about now. And when I received a copy of Guido Moosbrugger's book, And Yet They Fly, published by Steelmark, and after reading it, I decided it's time to review his work again. Now, joining us this evening is a spokesperson for the Billy Meier case, Michael Horn. Michael Horn has an eclectic background in the arts, music, and performing. He is an award-winning painter, inventor, the creator of the still popular fashion fad fingernail art, a theatrical set designer, one of the first of the creators of electronic online digital book publishing, a prolific published songwriter, singer, guitarist, writer, video and music producer, humorist, and lecturer. Sounds like James, who's that, Hillary Boob? Yes, that's right. That's right, in the Yellow Submarine. Michael is also the creator of the popular doctor-recommended Sit and Get Fit videos and fitness program, which he teaches to about 200 people every week in Los Angeles, and hopefully in the months to come, when we got a little bit more time, we'll ask him to join us and talk about that. He sent us a couple of videos, and I'll have a chance to look at them in the weeks to come. Well, let's see. He created the program as a result, this program called Sit and Get Fit Videos, a result of his more than 30 years experience in Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, and various massage, healing, and movement arts from Asia, as we say in Balmer, Asia, and Eastern Europe. That's about down in Dundalk. We used to say that a lot, friends. Welcome to 21st Century Radio, Michael.
Thank you. I guess I should be impressed with myself.
Yes, you should be, and it serves you right. Well, I certainly looking forward to talking to you tonight because, as I mentioned a little earlier, I have a great deal of respect for Jim DeLatosa, but, you can't debate a book you haven't read.
That's true. I will also admit I have not. I've looked at some of Korf's book. However, the two people who've done the most research into the book and have also provided rebuttals for it are James Deardorff and Jerome Jansen, and their work there can be linked through the site if people want to go and visit Korf on that.
Well, Korf stayed away from the films. He absolutely could not debunk the films. The films were just too good. Yep. And that's one of the reasons why I was so surprised, because you can make all kinds of claims, because there's been a lot of misunderstanding in this particular this research and these photographs. And the first time I saw them, I think it was 75 or 76. With Chris Bird, we just sat there at the table and said, well, this is it. Finally, it's over. We finally got what we needed. And, of course, then all the debunkers came in, and that would certainly change things around. But that's traditional. That's traditional in our media-run country.
Well, it is. And one thing that I did a couple of years ago, in 2001, I went to the Professional Skeptics Organization. It's called CFI West, that's Center for Inquiry West. They're associated with the almost amazing Randy, the magician and debunker. And I had met with one of the lead investigators there, a man named Vaughn Reese. I showed him some of the photos from, the classic coffee table book that most all of us saw and spent time, with our jaws hanging down about. And also I showed him some of the films that you're talking about. And Mr. Reese had told me that it was all a very easily duplicated hoax, quote unquote. He explained how it was done, and that I, at that point, said to him, well, if it's that easy, would you spare me any further embarrassment if I'm going to be speaking about this case? Would you duplicate one of these photos and the film segment that you say is so easy to duplicate? He agreed in February of 2001. Over the next couple of months, I called and visited him. He did have the camera, the 35mm still photo camera, and an 8mm film camera that he said he would use to reproduce the movie footage. By May of that year, I finally said to him, look, since nothing's forthcoming, why don't you just use a computer, and you can use Photoshop and special effects, digital, whatever you want. But if you want to be a real sport about it, just use one arm, because Billy Meier only has one. That was in, May of 2001. I ran into him again in, I think, March or May of this year, somewhere around there. And he still had nothing to show for his claim. He could do this. And he did tell me that he'd be better equipped once he had a new lab set up at the new location for the offices of this skeptics group.
Why didn't you just buy him a new lab?
Yeah, I should have probably. And I did say to him, look, this is kind of silly, because you've been at this ostensibly for 2.5 years, and in that period of time, in a 2.5-year period of time, back in the 70s, Mr. Meier had already taken, quote, probably about 800 or 900 photographs and a couple or more of his film segments. He did it all with one arm. He didn't have a photo lab. He dropped the stuff off at the local photo developing shop in a little village in Switzerland. And maybe this is too much for you. So I think that we can, the photographs and the films, exciting as they are and great as they are, and still irreproducible, as are the sound recordings, as are the metal samples. That is what I would call like the baseline standard of proof, and nobody can meet it. But there's certainly a higher standard of proof in the case, if you can imagine that.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about Edward, Arthur, and we'll call him Billy.
Albert, Meier. Yeah, Edward Albert.
Albert, I'm sorry,
okay.
Albert. Billy Meier. I understand he doesn't like the word name Billy, but sometimes you get stuck with things you don't like.
I don't know. Everybody calls him Billy. I've been over to Switzerland a few times. I was just there in May again, and everybody calls him Billy. So he doesn't seem to have put up a fuss about it. It may not be his favorite, but it's stuck.
Yeah, well, tell us about his earliest contacts with extraterrestrials.
Well, as the story goes, they started when he was about 5 years of age. He and his father had been out in the meadow near their rural environment, which they lived in about 1942. He was born in 1937. And they saw a silver disc object fly by overhead, soundlessly, and they noticed it, and he asked his father what it was, and his father said he didn't know. He thought maybe it was a special weapon that was being developed by Hitler at that time. Shortly after this period of time, Meier, who had forest, on the property, it's a lot of, all over Switzerland, that rural area, there's lots of forest and things. He felt kind of compelled to go into the forest and play, and he saw, in a clearing in the forest, he saw a strange-looking, pear-shaped craft. And he sensed a calling, that he was being beckoned to this, and he saw an elderly-looking man standing in front of it in what looked like some type of either a deep-sea diving suit or what we would nowadays consider to be perhaps an astronaut-type outfit. He said he felt no fear. This was not an abduction. He felt that the man was not only quite harmless to him, but there was something kind about him, and he trusted, and he went and met this man. And thus began a series of meetings with this man who, Meier says his name was given as Svath, and that these meetings were on board the ship and not always on the ground. Sometimes, actually, he took him off and above the earth. But they were kind of tutoring sessions, and they were also sessions in which there were various devices that Billy said were placed on his head, and that this man Svath informed him that this was going to give him information and help his development of his thinking, and there would be many things that this type of an induction, or whatever term you might want to use, would benefit him later on in time as his life, matured and expanded. He also explained to him that by the time he was about 7 years old, that he had the thinking capacity of a mature 35-year-old man. He also explained to him that his life would probably be very difficult. Now, during this period of time, over the couple of years that he had these meetings with Svath and had these experiences, he could not he didn't feel he could speak to his family about it. He did feel there was one man who might understand. It was a village or parish priest, and the man encouraged him to continue to have the experiences. He said this was not a bad thing. This was good, and these were good people. And when he would hear the voice of the man in his head, it troubled him occasionally to think that he was hearing a voice in his head, and this parish priest had assured him that no, there was nothing wrong here. So Meier has written that he thinks that this man had some form of contact with these people, and that it was part of the overall mission, if you will, for him to confide in the parish priest, and for this man to encourage him. And indeed, from that point on, his life was marked by many difficulties, enormous difficulties in school and behaviorally and what have you, and that would follow throughout his life. While they were also even far more enormously interesting experiences, from which he learned quite a bit.
Well, it's about 1975, and Billy Meier's contacts with the ETs from the Pleiades. Actually, as we learn later, much later in the book, they are, I may mispronounce this, but I'll give it a shot, Plejarians.
Yeah, that's it, Plejaren.
Yeah, that takes on a totally different character. And, I'll tell you what, while we'll take a break here so that we can stay on this particular topic. So what we want to do is find out about his relationship between these beings and Billy, because this was not his younger experience from the age of 5 on. This was an accidental. There was a larger plan here. And this is one of the interesting things about Billy Meier is that he did not have an easy life. He never has had an easy life. He still doesn't even have an easy life now, and especially when you take a look at what skeptics say about guys who write books who are going to be multimillionaires and become famous by being all over radio and TV. I haven't seen Billy Meier on radio and TV, and I don't think he has more than a couple of $100,000 ever. Probably a lot less than that.
Probably communal property, too.
Yes, indeed. So when we return, we'll begin to take a look at these Pleiadians, or Plejarians, and find out exactly what that relationship was and the purpose of this ongoing 11-year process. This is 21st Century Radio. Our guest is Michael Horn. The book is And Yet They Fly, the most comprehensive eyewitness account on the extraterrestrial contacts of Billy Meier in 20 years by Guido Moosbrugger. Steelmark Publishing, as a matter of fact, their website is yettheyfly.com. For more information on the Billy Meier case, www.figu.org or www.billymeier.com.
futuretalk.org and click on Hieronimus and Company. That's www.futuretalk.org, or by mail send $30 to H&Co, P.O. Box 648, Owings Mills, Maryland 21117, or at futuretalk.org.
Hi, everyone. This is Betty.
And Bob Luca, and you're listening to
21st Century Radio, the Bob Hieronimus Show.
You see, they don't come here to harm us. They don't come to start trouble here or war or to overtake the earth in their ruling. They just see us here as their little brothers or something like that. And they want to bring the real teaching of the natural life and of the spiritual belonging, spiritual teaching, spiritual life, and all this.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. That was Billy Meier telling us why they've come here. So, friends, you can put your machine guns away and everything else. They're unnecessary. You won't need them, at least for these beatings. You might need them for something else, though. Of course, our guest is Michael Horn. We're talking about the book, And Yet They Fly, the most comprehensive eyewitness account on the extraterrestrial contacts of Billy Meier in 20 years by Guido Moosbrugger, Steelmark Publishing. Now, this book is out of print, but if you contact the publisher, they will probably put you on the waiting list for the revised second edition expected sometime around Christmas. And, of course, we're going to be awarding one of those books this hour. By the way, you can call them at 918 Steelmark Publishing, 918-827-6453. Now, Michael, okay, we're going to jump ahead here. It's 1975, and Billy Meier's contacts with the ETs from Pleiades take on a different character. Tell us about his relationship between these beings and the purpose of this ongoing 11-year process.
Sure. Let me just go back in case it wasn't clear. When he did meet with this man Spoth when he was younger, it wasn't an accident. It was like best way to put it, it was the actual initiation, if you will, of the contacts. They started deliberately at that time with him. So jumping ahead to 1975, he begins to have, I should say that there are some contacts in between those two periods of time. They're not extensively covered in the book. They're with a woman named Esket. But let us go to 75 because most of what will most concern us will be from 1975 on. And he has his first meeting with a woman who calls herself Semjase, S-E-M-J-A-S-E. So they use the J as a kind of an I or Y sound, Semjase. And Semjase, in her contacts with Billy, starting with the earliest ones in 1975, basically presents him with a lot of information pertaining to almost anything you can imagine, actually. Cosmology, history, astronomy, archaeology, ancient civilizations, spiritual teachings. She not only speaks to him about things, she takes him in her ship, takes him to see different things up close and personal, excuse me, and also takes him to what's known as the Great Spacer, or the mothership of the Plejaren that her father commands. So this, can sound like quite a bit, and people can start saying it sounds like science fiction to me, but there's some very, very distinguishing pieces of information in the case that upon which one might say you can build irrefutable scientific proof. And so much of it comes from and out of the communications and contacts that Meier had with Semjase. The process was that, and actually apparently not with her, but still with the Plejaren to this day, has to do with his being able to sense that they are coming to have a contact with him. There's a sensation he feels on his forehead. There's a telepathic connection that he was trained from a very, very young age to be able to receive and also to initiate. He additionally was taught, I may not have the exact figure correct, but it's correct, something like 1.2 million symbols, actual specific, different, unique symbols. The reason for this was that after his meetings and his conversations, say, with the Plejarens, on board the ship, or even in his own office, or in the grounds where he lives, wherever they might happen, or out in the fields or meadows. At a certain time afterwards, they would transmit to him via a mechanical telepathic means that they possess, meaning through a machine that telepathically broadcasts to him the entire conversation between he and whatever other party or parties were involved. Now, this is not transmitted to him in words. It's transmitted to him in these symbols. He, with his one arm, one hand, if you will, would sit at his typewriter at the time, and perhaps computer, nowadays, and as the transmission comes to him, he receives it and simultaneously translates those symbol impulses into the words and proceeds to type at a high, very rapid rate of speed. If I'm remembering correctly, it was said that he could, back in those days, type out about 1,200 characters or keystrokes per minute. Now, the additional amazing aspect of that is that in the German language, all the nouns are capitalized. Unlike in our language, you can have, a whole sentence, a whole paragraph where there's nouns in our language, and there's no need to lock down the shift key and, hit the key and go back and undo it. But in German, that is how it is. So one of the more amazing things when you look at the contact notes or read the conversations and realize this man was sitting there often for hours at a time, kind of in an almost robotic state of mind, pounding away on the keyboard and getting these conversations into transcript form. So it was quite remarkable.
Well, the whole process is remarkable in many ways. Obviously, Billy Meier may look to say some folks like someone who's just just an ordinary person, but he's far beyond that in many ways. Now, they refer to themselves, these beings, the Plejarians, as Errans, E-R-R-A-N-S. What did they tell us? Can you tell us a little bit? No, before I even get into that, friends, these beings are very, they're humanoid. They look just like us. They may have little differences like longer earlobes or little things like that. But if you saw them on the street, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. If you saw them on the street and they were all dressed up, you just wouldn't know.
Exactly what I understand to be true. At least one, Semyaze, and perhaps others of them have done back in those earlier years, did do a little walking around. When they actually went to acquire different things, they would pass very easily for Nordic-looking, peoples, Swiss or Northern Europeans.
And of course, they also mentioned that there are literally, maybe throughout a certain part of our universe, 500 billion of them from various types of solar systems, and they're all basically humanoid. Correct?
Well, I don't know the exact number that that you just used. I don't know if all of these numbers by heart. I would say that they are familiar with, I think, over 8 million space-traveling races, and that, there are, in some book, and I might even have it around, I'll find it at a break here, Meier does state how many races were with the original creation, and that's a term, in other words, that were created in this universe. And there are quite literally many millions of them.
I think it's over 40 million.
I think you're right.
That's extraordinary. And so, and as we learned friends, remember, just 2 weeks ago, when we broke the news that, my heavens, it's not, we know now for sure, you can go faster than the speed of light. And and when you take a look at the craft that the Pleiadians were using, they go many times faster than the speed of light. And of course, we've been told until recently that's just impossible, and that's not impossible at all. It's just unfortunate that we get stuck with information that is very antiquated and will for the next 15 or 20 years if our government has anything to do with it. Now, can you tell us a little about the Errans? We don't have much time on this because there's so much just to cover, but what about their, nutrition?
Well, this is an interesting part of it that occasionally disturbs some people.
Yeah, sure.
They're not vegetarians.
That's right, yeah.
And it's a paradox in a way. Try and encapsulate this as best I could. They have said that for the majority of people on this planet, animal proteins and the substances contained in animal proteins are essential for not only the health of the body, but for thinking process. Now, let's just admit there are people that do fine without it. But what they're saying is that the vast majority, way above the 90 percentile, needs and requires a certain amount of animal protein. However, because they also are advanced technologically and have certain ethical considerations, what they say they do, they are at the stage where they grow the animal protein. They culture it much the same way as we might culture tofu, at least in our concept. Whether they do it exactly that way or not, I'm not in a position to say. But they grow these proteins so that they have meat, and they don't have to, kill animals for it. There is an exception. I believe they cultivate also one small rabbit-like animal that they occasionally actually do have as a food source. They are, of course, if you're able to read the book, and when it comes back into print for all the listeners, they're agricultural and it's quite extensive. They are proponents of responsible genetic modification and engineering, because they say that it's only that way that not only will we create even better and improved varieties and sizes and nutritionally valuable foods, but we'll actually solve many of the dilemmas that vegetarians have, because when we can enter into this culturing and growing of meat, then you solve the ethical quandary that vegetarians face, and you get the nutritional benefits, clearly there. They do have a very sophisticated robotic means of mass production of food, yet all of them have their own gardens and tend their gardens and work on the planet, work in their earth. They are not simply, brains on a stick, but are floating around in spacecraft. They feel it's essentially important that people realize, as truly as third-dimensional beings, which they also are, that we have to maintain a healthy connection to our planet, to the earth of it, if you will, with our bodies, with the plants, with animals, because this is nature. Nature being a creation of the creation, or the all, encompassing creative force that we call the universe. That nature holds many keys and secrets to the laws of creation and truths and evolution and what have you. It's not simply, we see the seasons come and go. What they have said is that if we will just take the time to contemplate and observe ever more deeply, looking in that nature, we will see the secrets of creation. The things will be revealed. And of course, anybody that has taken a biology class or studies physics or any of the sciences, realizing that, we are looking at the natural world or the natural universe. Of course, there's quite a bit there.
Indeed, there are so many things. Many don't have time to touch on their transport vehicles, and by the way, they don't sit around in their Mercedes and drive around, friends. They hoof it a great deal. They only work a couple of hours a day, but everyone works a couple of hours a day. Exactly. They don't just stay on one job. They do many jobs. Now, if you study the pattern of Billy Meier's life, I understand he had over 380-some jobs in it, or something like that.
That's correct. I mean, everything you can imagine.
He can do just about anything.
And I observed, this is the remarkable thing about, if you do have the opportunity and you go to Switzerland to visit the center and meet with the people, first of all, this is not like, there's no gurus sitting around and incense and offerings. These are people that live and work at this center, and they maintain it. As a matter of fact, I have each year become more and more fascinated with the physical center and the way it's been maintained. I was talking with some of the people, including Billy, about it. I said, while the UFOs and all of that is really interesting, I look at your hinges. I look at the way you've built your sheds and all this stuff, because there's a working with nature that is so, it's delightful. I don't live in a rural environment, and the kind of people that would probably really get a lot out of this also are people that lived on farms, live in nature, and they look at how these people live and maintain themselves and their tools and all this. I went snooping around and looking for, where would they build UFO models, but you don't see that. You see sheds full of rakes and hoes and shovels and working gloves. You see a garage with an old tractor in it that's maintained as excellently as possible, with every conceivable part stored on the wall and the wrenches. So these are people that live that lifestyle. They know how to survive and to thrive that way.
That's very important. I especially in regards to their prison methods, basically, friends, you do break some major laws, and you just do not stay on that planet.
You're gone.
You're a goner, and you're also separated. Males and females are then separated from that standpoint. There are so many excellent things that they're involved with.
No capital punishment, though.
George, that's right. No capital punishment for very good reasons. And in part, as Guido, and certainly you know, their feeling is in part that when you put an end to someone else's life for murder or what have you, that individual comes back into incarnation rapidly and does not learn from that previous experience of what he has done, because frankly what we're doing is we're trying to become better human beings. The golden rule is not a bad rule to follow. Doing unto others is really key to being a human being on this planet. I wish our scientists would realize that someday. So I won't have time to discuss the public order or their cosmic alliances or forms of government, but they're in this book. This is an extraordinary work. Now, really, it's break time, my boss says. We're going to take a break. You're going to say something?
No, I was just going to echo, your sentiments about the book and the wisdom of not, capital punishment. For those people, just a quick thing, shut me off if you have to, but they believe if they banish people permanently, they do protect the society, and they give the people a chance, at least, for some atonement.
Indeed. Okay, now, we're going to take a break here. When we return, we're going to talk about how are we related to these Plejarians or Pleiadians. What was their view of our solar system? Because when you take a look at their view of what our solar system was about 75,000 years ago, you'll have a better understanding of what Velikovsky was trying to tell us. You'll have a better understanding of our good friend Dr. Van Flander, and understanding what that asteroid belt is all about. This is 21st Century Radio. Our guest is Michael Horn. We're discussing the book, And Yet They Fly, the most comprehensive eyewitness account on the extraterrestrial contacts of Billy Meier, and we'll return in just a few minutes.
Two friends having coffee together, and something flies by their window.
Fleetwood Mac, isn't it? Yes, that is Fleetwood Mac. There wasn't a rock and roll group that I ever met or goofed off with back there in the late 60s, early 70s, and here in the 90s that wasn't deeply into UFOs. Many of them had sightings. You name a rock musician, even Elvis. Even Elvis was deeply into this. Of course, the media doesn't talk to you about stuff like that. Of course, it's not important, right? Extraterrestrial life is just not that important. Well, our guest is Michael Horn. We're discussing the book, And Yet They Fly, the most comprehensive eyewitness account on the extraterrestrial contacts of Billy Meier in 20 Years by Guido Moosbrugger, Steelmark Publishing. And again, that book will be out in a second edition somewhere around Christmas. And you can go to the website, however, at www.figu.org or www.billymeier.com. Well, Michael, the Pleiadians, how are they related to Earth people?
Well, it's actually a long story.
Yep, you got to make it short.
And I will. Let's put it this way. In many cases, their forefathers were our forefathers, that ancient members of their races participated on this planet, again, in ancient times, as rulers. They did genetic experiments here. They did couplings with the primitive Earth humans that were here. They mingled, and in the process broke a lot of what you might call cosmic laws. So they set things in motion, along with some other ETs. They weren't the only ones, but they set things in motion that were to continue to haunt us, if you will, and do to this day in many ways. They feel that a lot of the misdirection of the world in terms of what they consider to be cultic religious beliefs and illogical thinking is, well, it's one of the main causes of our problems, and that these religious forms and belief systems were, in many cases, instigated by their forefathers. So they feel that they have what they call a self-obligated mission to assist us without interfering or directly participating in our lives, to correct misdirections, especially since we are heading down a path that it doesn't take an extraterrestrial to perceive is extremely dangerous, but it's even more dangerous than most human beings perceive. And a lot of it has to do with political, military, economic, religious, and scientific machinations. Excuse me. It's kind of the position I would liken it to this. If you're going in the wrong direction, you don't need somebody to get in the car with you. You need somebody who can point out the way. And if somebody can point the way and you can take the direction and make it your own, you can choose to go in that direction and travel down that road if you wish. I think it's very much what they are trying to do so that we can take the responsibility that truly is ours to rectify the damage to ourselves, to our planet, and perhaps, if we're not careful, to our future.
And it's important, of course, to note that they, as certainly, I'm just trying to quickly point that friends, if you're expecting them to come and land and carrying us away when we have some very serious earthquakes and things of that nature, which, as the earth changes, it evolves, and we're going to have some difficulties. And if you're going to stand out there and wave your flag, you're going to wave it a long time, in my opinion. And I'm pretty sure that that's how Billy Meier and the Pleiadians feel, because we have to do the work. Yep. You don't dump it on somebody else. A lot of the individuals we've had lots of researchers come on and say, they're going to lend us a helping hand. And I think that the way they're going to lend us a helping hand is to help us help ourselves from that standpoint. Yep. Now, the Pleiadians relate, and this is real important stuff that we're about ready to touch on to understand our solar system. They say that they're about 3,500 years in advance of Earth beings, and that their knowledge of our solar system, our knowledge that is incomplete. For example, let's take our look at the solar system about 75,000 years ago, just before there were any big changes in it. How did the Pleiadians or Plejarians say what did our solar system consist of?
Well, a couple things. Let me back up just for a second and say that they claim that they are now about 8,000 years ahead of us technologically, and quite literally millions in terms of spiritual development. I put this under the speculative category because we are really not able to prove or disprove this. It's simply the information that we're given, and the reason I think it's there, excuse me, if we look at all the other information, and as we look at the information and find out where the credibility is, we'll be more inclined to give some serious thought to certain things which may be outside of our current, quote-unquote belief systems and all of that. Now, as for the stuff regarding the solar system, are you referring especially to the fact that they said that the planet Venus was brought in?
Yes, yes, that, and of course the planet, we had a planet at least within our solar system. Yes. They refer to as Malona?
Yes.
Malana?
It's sometimes called Phaeton, and some people I think have referred to it as Maldek. What they've said, there's so much stuff here about it. The drama and dynamics of our solar system, and indeed life altogether. The planet that is no longer in existence was one of 3 inhabited planets, according to the Plejarens, and they said that they accounted for Earth, Mars, and this other planet, Malona, as being populated by human beings. And these human beings had been brought from the depths of space. Genetic engineering of a warrior race in the Sirian star system. And now you're talking about millions of years ago. So to touch upon that just briefly, because there is so much here to play with, if you will, they spoke about a very highly advanced race in the Sirian star system, a race that had attained great heights of spiritual development, and being quite able to also do genetic engineering and manipulation. They engineered out of themselves the necessary genetic traits for aggression and fighting. They thought it was a bit less than what they should have. Now this, according to this material, left them vulnerable to other hostile space-traveling races who were malevolent and attacked them. So they decided they needed to have protection, and they genetically engineered a human species that would have a high level of aggression and fighting ability. They made sure of that by modifying the genes in this species so that the barbarism and aggressive characteristics would be not simply at a normal level, but would be kind of amped up, supercharged a bit. On the other hand, recognizing that if they were going to create a fighting species here to do their bidding, that they might one day have to protect themselves from these beings, they, being long-lived beings themselves, decided to limit the lifespans of their new creation. So they set it to about what we would call 100 years or so, or less. So this new genetic species was highly aggressive and could be trained very easily to fight, and would not live long enough to become a threat. They made sure of this also by genetically engineering in the predisposition for certain types of diseases that would cause infirmity and aging and what have you. When these newly created warrior beings had served their purpose, they were deemed to be no longer useful to these Syrians, and so a decision was made. That these beings would be eliminated. Now, that means they would have simply been killed, wiped out somehow. There were many in the Syrian population who viewed this as not being a spiritual thing to do and not being right, and it so troubled them that a good number of them took some huge ships and took vast numbers of these beings and fled with them from the Syrian star system in the direction of an unknown, part of the universe to them, even through an altered space-time configuration. And they entered into a distant solar system somewhere out in the spiral arm of the Milky Way, meaning, ours. They found 3 planets that were habitable. They settled on them. And there were many things that had happened in the course of time, but just to address the drama of it, the humans who inhabited the planet Maldek in time came into possession of more technology, and they developed, and as human beings, especially with high degrees of aggression would have it, they became quite warlike with each other, and eventually succeeded not only in wiping various factions of the population out, they destroyed all the people on the planet and blew the planet up. And ostensibly they blew the planet up by somehow diverting seawater into chambers, magma chambers underneath for volcanoes, and caused tremendous eruptions, and literally the explosion of the entire planet, parts of which now circle as the asteroid belt.
Now, I want to stop here just a second, because, friends, remember what Dr. Thomas Van Flandern has been discussing for years on 21st Century Radio, and basically saying that the planet that was destroyed, that created the asteroid belt. He doesn't call it Maldek, he doesn't call it Malone or anything like that, but he said it blew up from within. Now, there are other theories of Zecharia Sitchin that said that some other planet came from without and crashed into it. Now, that's not what we're hearing here. This is really important for many different reasons. That's why I'm excited to send, as soon as we get some extra copies of this book, on to Dr. Thomas Van Flandern, for him to take another look at this, because I don't know how familiar he is with this. But somewhere then around the year 10,000 years ago, we're running out of time this hour, but 10,000 years ago, Venus somehow got moved as a moon from Uranus into further in our solar system. How did that happen?
I'm going to have to admit to not remembering all the details. It may have been pulled through by the Destroyer comet. I'm not sure.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Oh, good.
It was a closer...
For $500.
You just won a trip to Bermuda on a carton of Cokes, which none of us are going to drink, but at least you can win it. Oh, no. So that, again, another look at Velikovsky. Velikovsky would have loved to have had some of this other information. He certainly, because here was a man, again, that was ahead of his time. His theories weren't exact, but they were a lot closer, especially when you started studying mythology, because mythology is really key to understanding human beings. It's not just made up. Now, when we return, next hour. There are a number of things, but obviously we've got to get to the evidence of that Edward Albert Meier or Billy Meier presented in supporting his claims, and they came in the form of films, photographs, landing traces, metal fragments. Any one of them, in my opinion, are some of the best vindication on extraterrestrials that there exists on the planet. And then, of course, we want to get to the debunkers. Now, I'm not going to call them skeptics, because some of them may have been the skeptics, but what they have done in their opposition to the work of Billy Meier is they have stolen, they have taken his work and totally misrepresented it in many different ways. And that's very unfortunate, because the major media loves debunking, and they love this kind of stuff, unfortunately. So we want to touch on those areas, and then we need to go into most importantly, what is ahead for the planet?
Now more of 21st Century Radio with your host, Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
I think it isn't useful. Might they show them to the humans if they go to fight against them? It will make trouble for them, for us humans from this earth, and maybe for other ones. Those the Pleiadians, they aren't a single one who comes to Earth from other stars.
No, friends, we're not alone. We never have been. We're more than machines. Yes, you tell our governments that. You tell our scientists that. It's about time we realize that we have immortal spirit. Our soul is not immortal. Spirit is immortal. This is 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus this time around, friends. Next time, I think I'll probably be hanging down in Brazil, sweeping up the jungles for all the messes that I must have created with all the plastic stuff I used to buy. That's karma for you. And, of course, executive producer and research assistant for the past 15-plus years is General Laura Ellen Kortner, and our engineer is Tom Morosky. Oh, Michael, I'm sorry I had to go on a rant and rave there, but, as we see 50 million Americans having a terrible time of it right now,
Sure.
Can't go out to the beaches, they're not prepared. They thought, that it's almost like a Noah's Ark syndrome.
Well, Dr. Bob, let me give you something, especially for your listeners to think about, because as I've said, and the thrust of my focus on this case isn't so much about UFOs or even the extraterrestrials, but it's about us and what's coming and what we have to deal with. Now, in the book that you're talking about, there is a section, it's in the 15th chapter, it's an excerpt of a document that Billy wrote, and I'll let people can actually get to that document online, I'll tell you a little while, but he wrote it in 1995. I downloaded it from the internet in 98, and it's in the book, which was published in 2001. Now, in that book, in sequence, Meier warns of the attack on Iraq. He warns of the uprisings that will increase with Islamic fundamentalists. He warns of the spread not only of AIDS but of mad cow disease or CJS to other animals as well as human beings, and then the appearance of a new epidemic and disease, and then the increased concern about the threat of chemical warfare. All of those things just occurred sequentially, or basically in the chronology that he indicated here. But the one, in case people are saying, well, I'm looking at that, I'm not sure. Well, how about this? And this is just a direct quote. I won't read much from this book, but I'll just give you this. The danger of accidents in nuclear reactors will increase throughout the world. Regarding this subject, France in particular must be extraordinarily careful in every way. For one prophecy warns of a strong probability for an accident near Lyon, which can be prevented as long as the responsible individuals undertake the right steps. A prophecy can be changed. Now, for those people that have been following the news, just a few days ago, in France, there was great concern over a number of nuclear reactors that were getting too hot. They needed permission to dump water into the river and to try to cool down the reactors. And of course, this is only what, this is as much as the public hears about it. And of course, what were they talking about? Especially, there was one reactor right near Lyon. The rest of the prophecies in that segment, go on. They deal with things as diverse as what we will find when we get to Mars and all of this, but they also have a section warning signs for World War III, the things that, should they occur, we would know we have let ourselves go too far down the road and have now to deal with, a worldwide catastrophe. Backing it up from there, people might say still, why should we listen to or believe the information that comes through either Meier or these alleged extraterrestrials? And this is where I had created what I called the higher standard of proof. And going back as far as to February of 1975, as well as September of 75, Meier was told in these earliest contacts that there was a definite connection between the A-bomb testing, the explosions of A-bombs, and ozone damage. They were telling him that when the bombs were detonated, either through testing or when they were used at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that elementary radiations that were unknown to our scientists would enter up, very high-frequency radiations going into the atmosphere, penetrating the ozone layer, rending holes, and then allowing for ultraviolet to come through, which they said would kill microorganisms on Earth and in the atmosphere. It would lead to disruptions in the food chain, genetic mutations, etc. And they also mentioned bromine gases were another contributing factor. Now, this is in 1975. The first corroboration that I found was a newspaper article in 1988, 13 years later, when Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories published an article that said A-bomb testing tied to ozone depletion, and they told basically the same story as a new discovery that Meier had not only had published in a transcript, but had sent letters to 300 different scientific concerns around the world in 1975, 13 years before. And what is compelling here is that when the information was validated about the connection between bromine gases and damage to the ozone layer, that was in 1991, 16 years later. And there was an article in the Los Angeles Times dealing with the disruption to the food chain and genetic damage from the UV getting through the ozone holes, that was already in February of 92, 17 years after Meier had published it. And that is only the tip of the iceberg. And all this, people can read this stuff for themselves. They can do what I did. I went on to the Google search engine. I would pull all these different items that I was finding in the original Meier transcripts, about 1,800 pages. I would go onto Google and say, okay, did this event happen? When did it happen? Or this scientific information, is it true? When was it first known? In every single case, and I cite maybe almost 60 of them on the website, the information was accurate, the event occurred, or the scientific information was validated, and indeed, in every case, Meier's publication of it was the first known publication and forewarning of these events.
Of course, that's all just by chance.
Of course, it was an accident. Now, as good as those were, the one that really knocked my socks off, and I was going, wow, what is this about? I happened to read an article, this was about 2.5 months ago. I saw an article on the internet that was actually a 1998 news release from Cornell University scientists. What were they talking about? Well, the scientists were talking about the rings of Jupiter, which were discovered officially in 1979. They said that they now believe they knew that the rings of Jupiter were comprised of dust particles that came off of the moons of Jupiter. Now, when I saw that article, I said, gee, where have I seen that before? And I pulled out the old transcripts and one of Wendell Stevens' books. And in a transcript from 1978, actually in October of 1978, 5 months before the rings were discovered, Billy Meier and Semyaze are ostensibly in a spacecraft in front of Jupiter. He's remarking about the rings. Not only is he talking about the rings, he says, oh, look, Europa is covered with ice. And what you must have told me about the moon Io being the most volcanically active body is apparently also true, and that the source of the rings themselves are actually the dust particles that are flung off of the moon Io by volcanic eruptions at speeds of up to 2,300 kilometers per hour, at heights of 180 kilometers, with so much of this material being drawn up and forming the rings. So I said, gee, here he is 20 years ahead of Cornell University scientists. So I got on the internet and I found Dr. Joseph Viverka at Cornell University, chairman of the astronomy department, and actually reached him on the phone. To his credit, in terms of my opinion, he had the conversation with me. And I said to him, Dr. Viverka, you know your news conference in 1998 about the rings of Jupiter? And he said, yes, of course. I said, I just want to tell you that there's a man who published this information about the dust particles forming the rings 20 years before. And he said, really? I said, yeah. He said, send it to me. So I sent him the information just as it was in those notes, and I called him again. And what he was able to say to me, he said, well, you know, I just looked at that about the moon Io being the most volcanically active body in the solar system. And he says, and this is almost a trick quote, he said, if he, meaning Mr. Meier, said that then, he was 3 to 5 months before us. I don't know how he did it. And I tried to reach him for further comments. He has been unavailable for comment.
Well, yeah, isn't that the usual way?
Well, but
he was honest. At least he was honest. I mean, but
yes.
There are vested interests in the scientific academies and all the colleges and universities within this country and elsewhere. And indeed, there is a line to toe. And if you don't toe that line, you're going to lose your job.
Well, you've got it, you know, and fortunately we got that much out of him so that if ever we can have an interview and he's called to comment on this material, he's going to have a hard time denying, and I don't think he would. I think he would probably be honest enough to say he can't explain it.
Well, let's hope so.
This takes us, if I may, if you want something else, let me know, but I do want to mention the prophecies from 1981 and 1987 that have to do with these times, and if you want now or...
Well, let's take a break now. When we take a break, we'll go back to that, but this means we're going to abbreviate our entire discussion concerning the kinds of evidence of films, photographs, landing traces, and metal fragments. I can hold these all up to the microphone and people aren't going to be able to see them anyway, but I really do want to get to the point after that, how the debunkers have disputed these and the ways in which they disputed them, which in my opinion, my daughter would say it really sucks. It really does. I mean, because if you want to talk about lack of credibility, by the way, stealing photos, doctoring photos, and that type of thing, you would think scientists wouldn't do that. But my friends, when you got vested interests and you got books to sell and you want to keep your tenure, you do kind of crazy things. We'll be back with our guest, Michael Horn. The book is And Yet the Fly, the most comprehensive eyewitness account on the extraterrestrial contacts of Billy Meier, Guido Moosbrugger, Steelmark Publishing, and, of course, go to the website www.billymeier.com. And, by the way, in the months to come, certainly we'll have Michael come on to discuss his important work on sit and get fit. Now, boy, for guys like us that work 22 hours a day, I can't wait to look at that. And by the way, you can go to his website, www.sitandgetfit.com. Well, that's Sean Lennon, Spaceship. And of course, as you know, Sean Lennon's dad, John Lennon, had an extraordinary UFO sighting in New York City in 1975, I believe it was, with May Pang. Actually, it was 1974, my apologies. With May Pang, who certainly did him a lot of good, in my opinion. My apologies to Yoko Ono, but I think May certainly contributed there, Yoko, and you got to admit that. Our guest is Michael Horn. We're reviewing some of the work of this extraordinary soul, Billy Meier. It's called And Yet They Fly, the most comprehensive eyewitness account, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And please go to that website, andyettheyfly.com or www.billymeier.com to check out oil. And our guest, of course, is famous for his work with Sit and Get Fit. You can go to his website, www.sitandgetfit.com. and I haven't had a chance to look at his videos yet, but you can best believe we're gonna, because unfortunately we got to do a lot of sitting, or setting as we used to say, when you're putting in 14 to 16 hours every day. Now, Michael, you mentioned, I believe you wanted to do a few more prophecies of Billy Meier that he must have mentioned of 1981?
Yes. Actually, what happened is in 1981 he was given rather extensive prophecy. And again, it's really important to point out prophecy is alterable unless it reaches a point of no return. That is, if the warnings have not been heeded, people have not changed what they need to change, then you get an irreversible, irrevocable outcome, which you could say at a certain point turns into a prediction. In 1981, for instance, just a couple of the things that he was told back then, he was told that under certain circumstances, India and Pakistan would come close to a nuclear confrontation. They could be misled into a nuclear confrontation with each other if they were not careful. At that time, they did not possess nuclear bombs. But we know that it was just last year that indeed those two countries almost came to exchanging their now existing nuclear weapons. He was also told that France would probably be overthrown from within to a high degree by Muslim extremists.
Oh, my.
In 1981. There were many, many things in there, and then it was updated in 1987. And the troubling part of the update is that it dealt with a forewarning. I'll give you exactly the sentence. I mean, there's quite a bit here, but this sentence was, the destruction by terrorists of the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center will only be the beginning. And what they were foretelling is that our country is going to have quite a bit of difficulty because of the political, military policies of the government or governments that we've had that have often acted outside either of the will or the knowledge of the people, fomenting trouble around the world, trying to be the world's policeman. And the way they put it is America is generating enormous hatred against itself in many countries. As a result, enormous catastrophes will be visited upon America that will reach heretofore barely imaginable proportions. This is prophetic. Now, there is quite a bit of this, and not only for America, but for Europe. And they speak about which countries are going to go on the military march in addition to America, how America would try to get other nations to get on board for a series of worldwide wars, a series of them. And what they're trying to tell us, and trying to tell people in other countries as well, is that it is the people that has to get awakened to self-responsibility and to remove from power, not through bloody revolution, but to remove from power those persons at the heads of those governments who lead countries like ours into wars of aggression and domination, exploitation. This will only lead, according to them, to a third world war. And if we do not awaken, we get unbelievably devastating results. And they go into even describe the types of things, weather weapons, and what have you, firestorms, hurricanes. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that our own military has certain weapons in development already existing, in some cases, that are designed to interfere with the weather. And other forms of things they describe quite a bit and in quite a bit of detail. The prophecies are not designed to provoke fear. They are designed, if anything, to provoke an awakening in people. So that if you look at the material from 1981, material from 1987, or 1995, from any of these years in which either Meier or the Plejarians were speaking specifically about things on this world, you can see, and a lot of this is already laid out at yettheyfly.com, people can research, you'll see that they have been unerringly correct in the scientific and world event-related information for almost 30 years. So when this type of a prophecy, which was recently just released in English to people, we're waiting for the official, if you will, translation, but it's been translated and it's pretty clear what it's saying. When something like this comes forward, it really beckons for us to realize what the case is about. And it isn't about the UFOs or arguing about photos and the physical proof, as good as it is. That's why when I say, if people look at almost 30 years of documented prophetically accurate, specific information in a wide variety of areas, maybe then the lights will go on. Hey, instead of wondering if there's ascended masters and saints and UFOs and all the rest and praying and deities and gods, maybe we could recognize that we have been given guidance and information, but it's been inserted in an oblique angle, like a piece of a puzzle, for us to discover, if we will, for us to work through it, for us to wrestle with and to start to wake up to what this is about. And it is about the self-responsibility. It's about cleaning up the personal code and the community code and linking together, not trying to change the world in big political movements, because the political movements are dead-end games. They never lead anywhere except into one party acting to promote its own self-interest. We have to develop a for the common good, true standard of conduct, and then allow and encourage those persons who are genuinely capable of wisdom and leadership to come forward into leadership roles apart from political parties. Those are irrelevancies that are simply to play people off against each other. This is within this material, and much, much more. I'll put out one call to you, if you will, and to your listeners. I am going to be bringing this in a full multimedia fashion on a lecture circuit that I want to create, mainly for colleges or community centers or wherever they will have it. It will include the slides and the photos and the films and the medical samples and all this stuff showing the evidence and going through it, but it will go into the higher standard of proof, which is the prophetic, already accomplished circumstances and events, and then the prophecies for these times that they're trying to awaken us to, and then the suggestions that they make, their kind of cosmological view of life in the universe, where we fit in, how we can elevate and raise ourselves out of a two-thirds destruction of our world in the not-too-distant future to going a little bit more effortlessly into a more promising future, not only of surviving, but thriving.
Well, and thank you for mentioning all that. One of the things I want to point out deals with our method in this nation and other nations of getting rid of certain opposition. And generally, Billy Meier has had it really kind of tough. Kind of tough isn't quite the right word for this, because from the very beginning of these contacts and their documentation, Billy faced, threats on his life. There have been at least 13, maybe up to 18 different 19 attempts to murder him.
Yep.
Now, are they trying to murder him because he's discussing photographs of UFOs? Well, maybe not. But I think what they want to do is kill the messenger. And the message basically is, in part, there are vested interests. Eisenhower warned against it with the military-industrial complex. Now it's the media thrown into that because everybody's owning everybody else and in control of it. And we saw what happened during the last war when a few people thought to themselves, hey, let's give this a second thought. Well, before you know it, they were thrown off the air. You weren't allowed to discuss much of this. I saw a lot of this in Baltimore especially. Killing the messenger is an old trick to make sure that you get rid of opposition so that you don't pay attention. But as you've already noted, if he has been accurate in over 60 different precise situations, then I think he is someone at least you should listen to.
We check it out. Well, and this one wouldn't take an extraterrestrial, but in the very, I think it was April 2nd, he had a contact, and he was told in the course of the contact, I think, just as a matter of information, the extraterrestrial, goes by the name Quetzal, said to him, we've taken a near future look at Iraq, and what you will see will be an increase in attack against American and British forces, and this will be fomented to a great degree by the Islamic fundamentalists, but look for the Shiites to establish a religious dictatorship. So now, that may or may not come to pass, and we know, of course, that the attacks have increased. It's a fairly safe bet that was going to happen, but we have to see that this has been a misguided venture, and the problem here is And they have written specifically about this administration. They say, look, when we say America and the Americans, we're not referring to all the American people, though it is their responsibility. We're saying that your leadership, your Mr. Bush and the people under him, are ill-informed, they're misguided, they're delusional, they are in religious delusion, they're in political delusion, and if they are not stopped, if people don't reject this man will lead your country against the rest of the world, in effect. But the consequences, not only for the people that will be destroyed by this, but the consequences to America are terminal. And they've spelled it out. So we could say, well, it's just another crazy prophet. Yeah, but his track record is too good. They're trying to help. And they have given, and this can also be found, everything on our website right now is free. People can go and check this stuff out for themselves. They've given guidelines for restoring genuine leadership to the planet, how we need to and how we can establish true peace, with the kind of work we have to do to bring real love and peace, and not, these silly words of it, and how birth control and population control, something that will irritate people will be the fact that we have to limit illegal immigration. If you're a kind-hearted person and you tend to have a liberal slant on it, well, there's nothing wrong with that. They, in a very logical, matter-of-fact way, show how it deteriorates and degenerates the host country of people who leave strictly for economic reasons, not in fear of their lives, but strictly economically, and how it then deteriorates countries into which people come strictly for economic opportunism, and how that leads to strife and famine and wars and political problems and prejudice, and then creates problems that the new increased population itself cannot deal with because it has not evolved itself to handle this. It's very complex, but there's an awful lot of wisdom in it, at least in my mind. If you talk about environment, they have spelled it out in spades. And to degrees which we have yet to see. They have figures and facts on the actual sustainability of the planet, how many people can safely be sustained. Even this goes down to population per acre or whatever, stuff that's frankly, it's been a bit beyond my immediate interest in terms of delving into the facts and figures, because it made sense to me alone. But so much of this is about accountability and people taking back the power instead of turning it over to these silly political games or to religious institutions or leaders of any sort. We have to start to wake up and make these decisions for ourselves and come together and do the hard work. In this country, we have given it all up for comfort and convenience to a high level. A lot of good people, but we want our football games and our TV. We don't want to be disturbed. If somebody gets kicked off the air for dissent, no one's speaking up about it. It's not good. There's a dark road that comes from walking through that door and not checking all of this.
That's for sure. Now, when we're going to take our final break, when we return, though, we do need, I want to get to some of the methods by which Billy Meier's work has been debunked, and answer a few of these questions, because there's so much disinformation dealing with what Billy Meier, a one-handed, my God, remember, friends, he's got one arm, he's got one hand, he doesn't have anybody, there is no one that's ever come forward with all the people he's worked with. No one has ever come forward and said, I helped Billy Meier create models to stick them up in the air. And wait till you hear about where in the world the one particular model that we're referring to came from, and why. Because that's enormously misunderstood in this particular work. In other words, it's one of those situations in which you just try to create whatever you can, great doubt on anyone who happens to see the future clearly, because the future of the planet is not going to be very easy at all. We'll be back with our guest Michael Horn, the book, And Yet They Fly, the most comprehensive eyewitness account on the extraterrestrial contacts of Billy Meier. And of course, it's out of print. You can call Steel Mark Publishing at 918-827-6453, 918-827-6453, and put your request in for a copy in advance to make sure you get it, because I'm certain second edition is going to sell out just as well. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
I keep traveling around the bed, there is no beginning, there is no end. There wasn't born, never died. There are no edges, there is no side. Ah, yeah, you just don't win. It's so far out the way I everybody's in. Found your car and call him sir, but if you don't know where you're going, every road will take you there. And if you don't know where you're going.
George Harrison, Any Road Will Take You There. That's from his Brainwashed album. And, whoops, here, take a listen to this little segment of a tape. What you are listening to is a sound recorded by Billy Meier of one of the Pleiadian craft. And that has been studied intently. As a matter of fact, with our guest, Michael Horn, as we discuss and complete our work here tonight on And Yet They Fly, we'll be asking him about that particular piece of evidence, along with a number of other pieces of evidence that Billy Meier has presented us, which have been lavishly debunked by a number of my friends, by the way. You know, they don't want to pay attention to this. They don't like the idea of prophecy for some reason or other. Oh, Michael, unfortunately, we only have about 12 or 13 minutes at the maximum here. So, you know, from the very beginning of these contacts and their documentation, Billy has faced great opposition in the form of debunking and threats on his life. As you noted, 19 attempted murders. And he must be saying something that's enormously important if 19 attempts have been made on his life. Now, we mentioned the films, the photographs, the landing traces, the metal fragments, but it's the sound that we just heard I'd like to focus on first.
Sure.
Could you tell us about this particular recording?
Billy and his wife went into a meadow, an open field, with a couple of cassette recorders. The beam ship, which they can protect from view, they have a means of shielding it from sight, and we'll just leave it at that for right now because time is short. But they hovered above, and they turned on their cassette recorders. I think there was something like 40 minutes of recording that was done. Over the period of the time that they were recording, up to 15 witnesses came by because people were hearing these sounds for kilometers around. They couldn't imagine what these booming, weird, strange sounds were. When the sound recording cassettes were turned over to Wendell Stevens and then taken to sound labs for analysis, including being reviewed by Steve Ambrose and Nils Ragnerud, who were well-known sound recording engineers connected to Stevie Wonder and other people. When these were examined, they found that there were 32 simultaneously interfacing frequencies running, quite a range. But the thing that was most telling was that only 24 of those frequencies were in the audible range. The other 8 frequencies were only discernible because they had the spectrum analyzer and an oscilloscope through which they put the sound so they could see the patterns, and the other 8 sounds appeared there as well. I think they had a bank of synthesizers, and they attempted to duplicate. They could not duplicate the sounds. Now, this is back in 1980. I have, as recently as last year, had someone who does, science fiction sound things with synthesizers and all that, send me a CD of his own version of UFO sounds with an attached note. I can't duplicate the beam ship sounds. There's too much information there. You're talking about something recorded in an open field. You can hear birds occasionally or chirping sounds and wind blowing and all of that. And this was recorded on a cassette machine by this one-armed man and by his wife at the time as well. They remain irreproducible to today. No one still has been able to duplicate those sounds.
What about how have the debunkers decided to attack this particular situation?
Well, they can't. I've challenged the amazing Steve Randy. I challenged Von Rees from CFI West, Michael Shermer from Skeptic Mag, and my email exchanges with these people are posted at And Yet They Fly. Frankly, the word is pathetic. They cannot deal with this. They have always thought it was sufficient to simply say, it's a hoax and the case is closed. But I came at them. I said, nonsense. Now you have to debunk my research. Because you certainly can't duplicate his photos. You can't duplicate the film. There's a video, and you can get through to the Figo website, and you'll see there's a video on there that's mind-blowing, where Billy actually pans across a field 200 to 300 feet, and this UFO, he was hovering in front of a 40-foot tree in broad daylight, and there's no question this is not a model. but they can't duplicate that. They can't duplicate the sounds, the metal samples. And so I said, fine, you can't even touch that. Now go ahead and give me some prophetically accurate information, or explain how Meier was able to accurately publish all of this stuff, some of it up to more than 25 years before actual occurrence or discovery. The skeptics are flat-footed here. They won't even respond anymore.
Well,
I said to them, I'll appear anywhere. You want to take a shot at me? Come on. But they won't do it now because in their heart of hearts, they know it's not a hoax, but they can't explain it, so they don't want to deal with it.
Well, they have a vested interest, Michael.
Yeah, they have to be right every time, Dr. Bob.
Yeah.
Billy only had to be right with one photo or one film, and he's been right with 1,200 of them. So what are you going to do when you're a skeptic and you say, well, it's all a hoax, but you can't even come close to demonstrating how it's done? There are, as you said, no accomplices. There's no paper trail, no financial trail, nobody coming out of the woodwork. And with all these phenomenal, the physical evidence, as phenomenal as it is, Billy didn't march off to Hollywood to do special effects for Steven Spielberg. Again, the UFOs, and as good as this evidence is, it's not what the case rests on by a long shot. And the model you're talking about, indeed, that model was made deliberately so they could bring it to Switzerland and take photographs and see if Billy's photographs would look any different when they did computer analysis to the ones of the model. And Wendell, I'm sure Wendell Stevens, as you say, he's been a guest, and he's the man to talk to about this, because he was the man who led this team of investigators. And he was even there sitting when there was an assassination attempt on Billy, and Billy's head somehow jerked out of the way, and a rifle bullet came slamming into the wall. And this was at a time when Billy was having very direct protection by the Plejaren. And I mean, the Billy Meier story is beyond science fiction. And yet, it's all about us and today. And if we can, get through this and understand there's very grounded, very practical things these people are encouraging us to do, so we don't let ourselves be blown to smithereens under the misguidance of people who are unwise and incompetent to lead.
Well, then there's the problems that developed around some of the photos that were stolen from him.
Yes.
And then, friends, we don't have enough time to really discuss this area, but I've looked at this relatively carefully.
Yes.
And others have looked at it far more carefully than I have. And, when you start hearing some of the debunkers say, hey, I detected a string. Well, guess what, friends? They put it there.
That's right.
They stole the photos. They inserted strings and lines within the photos. I mean, this is science. This is the kind of thing that Billy Meier has had to answer for many, many times. And obviously, he is contributing something very important, which unfortunately go against what the vested interests on the planet, especially within the United States, want you to know about. They don't necessarily want you to know about any of this. I mean, the stuff that we talked about just 2 weeks ago about being able now to go faster than the speed of light. Our listeners will not find that in the major media for at least 5 to 10 to 15 years. Not because it's not true, but they haven't got an answer for that, because what it means is you can get there from here, or there from here. That's really the basic, the last bastion of those of my friends at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere who just love to say, this is impossible. There's no way to get there from here. It was almost like our wonderful Dr. Carl Sagan saying many, many times. He would say things like, well, look at these poor primitive people who see comets and meteors in the sky and are afraid of them. Now we find out, yes, they had every right to be afraid of them, because they have plunged on our planet frequently. They have destroyed civilizations. And this is no longer just a suggestion. Of course, the work of Dr. Robert Schoch is profound in this area and supports the numerous times we've been clobbered by rocks from space. So, unfortunately, Dr. Carl Sagan, you were dead wrong, but you misled us.
Yep.
And you let us feel. It wasn't until Jupiter got hit back there, was it 1994?
And they foretold that, I believe.
Yes, it was foretold. And Jupiter got hit by these.
Shoemaker-Levy?
Yes, and of course, what the problem, of course, is when the scientists saw that, they finally realized if that can hit Jupiter and do what it did to Jupiter, they could wipe us out. And we kept our eyes closed, head in the sand, until we find ourselves in a situation where we have no protection against these rocks from space. And we could have had protection from rocks from space.
We've been warned by the Plejaren and Meier that we have to develop such a defense system, and they have also said that indeed there is a deep impact scenario that's coming, and it's like some things that we can prevent and some we can't. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but we're not out of the woods, so to speak.
Well, we certainly aren't. I mean, this happens, according to Dr. Robert Schoch, we go through a meteor stream, and that is every 3,000 some hundred years, and that repetition of rocks from space certainly can put a damper on all life here, as we've seen.
It can ruin your picnic.
Well, yeah, indeed. Get to the point where you aren't going to be able to go have a picnic because you won't have a beach to go on because you're not going to be able to get into the water. And, of course, we're beginning to hear these things now, but it's kind of late, friends. It's 2003. We discussed these things. That's the reason why 21st Century Radio was born. We pay for this show. If we did not pay for this show, we would not be on the air, period. And that's important. If you understand what the media and media manipulation is and their vested interests, then over a period of time you find out that the kind of things that corporate media respond to and support deal with things that are going to support their calls. Now, obviously, oh gosh, we're about out of time. But in regards to Billy Meier and the upcoming events, that I think. What would you say is perhaps the most positive of the prophecies of Billy Meier?
Well, there's actually an enormous number of them, but Billy says for the most part prophecies are warnings so that people will know about negative things, that it isn't too logical for prophecies to warn you of positive things. But he, in the Contact 251, he does speak, and in the book, I believe there are a number of developments where we will have free energy sources and we will clean up this environment. We're talking probably a few centuries hence from now. But tremendous developments, expanded lifespans. They're going to reverse that. We spoke earlier about the gene that is, the aging gene. That will be reversed, and some of the accompanying disease, genetically induced diseases that were also put into our systems eons ago. There's lots of things, and as they said, genetic engineering, genetic modification, it has its good and bad sides. It isn't simply because something is genetically modified that we should not trust it. We've been eating genetically modified foods for decades, but there is a danger if things are not handled properly with any part of science. We have the good and the bad. So it is again always coming down to responsibility, self-responsibility, and wakening up to the fact that we are